This podcast is powered by Royal Adjusting. If you're a new, aspiring, or veteran property adjuster, head over to royaladjustingservices.com and join their roster for work opportunities. Hey, IAs, welcome to the new Adjuster Talk podcast by IA Path. I'm your host, Chris Stanley, and I'm joined by the founder of this podcast, my co-host, Jason Heenan, where each week we bring a panel together and talk about the big questions and topics that you face as an independent adjuster when you're getting started or growing your career. Now, today we are going to talk about what you should do if you're blacklisted by a carrier or fired by a firm. Is your career over? And if you haven't ever had this happen, what you should do to avoid it. Before we get into that, though, Jason, we're going to talk about why the heck are we restarting the Adjuster Talk podcast. We're in the episode 2, basically, of the new Adjuster Talk podcast. So I wanted to open it up to you and say, what made you decide to do this?
Yeah, Chris, thank you, first of all, for that nice introduction. It is so great to be part of a good qualified claims discussion and to be helping those of you, our listeners, basically. Hopefully this falls on the right ears and motivates the right person, even if they don't change their life, perhaps through adjusting, it is able to motivate them to make the improvements they want to. So thank you again. The answer is this. Adjuster Talk started in 2016 or 17, and it was a fun, interview a guy or an adjuster, get a few of their stories, and it was just kind of talk about it. And Chris, the amount of people it helped, the amount of people who continue to reach out from Adjuster Talk many years later and say, hey, this small tweak I made in my game made a huge impact on how I earn money, or maybe their claims philosophy changed a bit, and maybe they heard something and it got them hooked up with the right firm or the right network. But it's to help. I think it's important to teach a man to fish, and quite frankly, it feels good. So that was my motivation. What was yours? What do you think we have the best to offer here, Chris? What's going on with you?
Well, for me, I noticed that Adjuster Talk, one, crushed my podcast consistently in iTunes. Like, forget about it. Jason, he's leading the pack, and that's awesome. He deserves it. But two, as a fellow podcast host, I noticed that the production was kind of falling off. And I knew it was because you're having success in your own business, or at least I assume that's why. And just you were busy. And I'm like, decided to reach out and say, hey, Jason, what's going on with the podcast? I noticed there's not as many episodes as before, and you got a pretty big gap here. And that's when I reached out to you. I was like, is there something we can do here to work together to make this easier for you? Because I know that people are listening to your podcast. I see it ranking high. I know people are getting help, and there's a different audience that you reach than I reach at IA Path. And I'm like, we can't let Jason's influence fade away. We can't let that leave because he's having success. We need that continued support to these people to get them in the industry. So that was my motivation, was to keep reaching those people. And honestly, for me, I wanted to talk to those same people too. So as a business, it made sense. Hey, if I can help Jason, we can both do this together and alleviate the stress of a podcast, because it is stressful. It takes effort. It might not seem like it looks like we're just up here goofing off, but it takes planning, it takes time, it takes lunch hours, it takes all sorts of stuff. So that was my motivation. I'm super excited that you said yes. I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. It was like a whim call. And then he's like, let's do it. And I'm like, I guess we're doing it. Okay, let's do it. So that's why we're here with the new Adjuster Talk. And IA Path kind of took over, for those who are listening, the orchestration and the production and the publishing of the podcast. So Jason could just be Jason rather than trying to orchestrate a podcast. So, all right, here we go. Let's get into today's topic, into the icebreaker question, starting off. Because it's the newer style, just to remind you, we do an icebreaker question each time. We have a panel of people on, and then after we do an icebreaker and get to hear some fun stories, hopefully about being an IA, we go into the main topic. So to start off today's episode, the icebreaker question is this. Have you ever been blacklisted or fired by an IA firm? And I'm going to start with Brad on this one. Brad, I'm going to let you go ahead and be vulnerable first because you're our guest. Brad Fancher is the instructor of IA Path of Auto and Heavy Equipment. If you missed his introduction last episode, go back and check it out. But Brad, have you ever been fired or blacklisted by an IA firm?
Oh man, not yet. But I have been called by the owner of a firm. Thankfully, I missed the call. But then he reached out to me via email, and then we had a short email conversation. That was that's really the only negative or scary moment, I'll call it. And it was just major miscommunication, major. It wasn't due to neglect or anything, but I just trusted the shop. I trusted what the shop was telling me. And based on my inspection of the vehicle and the estimate that I wrote, and I just took the shop's word, and it taught me a huge lesson, big time. And yeah, I learned a lot from that moment. Thankfully, the firm did not blacklist me. So I haven't been blacklisted yet.
And for those who might not be familiar with blacklisted, basically we're just saying that a firm's saying, do not call this adjuster again. Do not give them any more work. We do not want to work with them. And carriers do this as well. Happens quite a bit in the catastrophe situations with carriers. So Jason, if you are ready, I'm going to throw it to you and say, have you ever been blacklisted or fired by an IA firm? Or a carrier, for that matter?
Unfortunately, Chris, I have a story here to offer, and it is my own personal story. I will let's prelude the story with this and say, at Royal Adjusting, from 14 years of being in business, we do not have an actual blacklist. Okay, now, do we have a short list of adjusters that we will never use again? Absolutely, but it is short. And the idea behind forgiving anyone who has been released or let go, or their pending has been transferred, we always try to be forgiving. Everyone makes mistakes, myself definitely included. And a little bit of training or a little bit of customer service, maybe an upgrade in equipment. You have to remember, whenever you are working for IA firms, you are actually a service provider. And as a matter of fact, whenever we're sending out welcome emails and that type of stuff, Chris, we say we want to have a sample of your service. So we want to try your service. Of course, we pay a good rate. We pay just like we do on every claim. But just to remind everybody that you are representing your own line of business. You are a business. Whenever you're an adjuster, you are, and that's what, we don't call them adjusters. We call them their claims business. Their pending is their claims business. All right. So back at it. Have I been fired? Absolutely. Worked for Pilot. I don't mind saying I was fired from Pilot in 2011 or 12. There was a monster hailstorm up in Prosper, and they had Prosper, Texas, huge houses, steep cutoff roofs. Eagle View was a brand new thing. So they still wanted you on the roof measuring, making sure you're collecting all the data. You couldn't just download a report in 24 hours. It was much different than Eagle Views were $80 on the big cut up houses. So anyway, there was a change to the Allstate's guidelines, how they wanted to handle the HVAC claims, which is just their outside air conditioning unit that was hit by hail. And typically those outside AC units, the condensing coils, your refrigerator has one. It looks like a radiator. For those of you listening who don't know, what happens to an AC unit outside is they get beat up pretty bad. Well, there was a huge claim on a house with 4 air conditioners, a very wealthy person. And the old protocol was that you could get the big estimate. I had a $40,000 estimate, plus the roof, plus all these other things. So it was like $100,000 claim. You have to have respect. This was 2012, so there wasn't quite as much money in the economy. You need to just cancel out 10 years of inflation. And so what I did was I took this. The HVAC people met me on site. It was macked up, the air conditioners. It was hot in this house. These were definitely rich and patient people. And I just took that estimate and with my own, their HVAC estimate, and I sent it for authority. Any claims over 50,000 had to go to Allstate staff. And so they put authority on it. I was able to issue the check within 24 hours. And then when they came back to get their depreciation, which the independent adjuster typically doesn't deal with, like 4 months later, they sent in the final invoice showing they got the air conditioners replaced. And that's when it raised the red flag. And so I got a call from whoever was, super important at Pilot at the time saying, hey, you can't do this. And we're going to have to take you off the storm for a while. Was it a big deal? No. I was already working claims for Royal and that kind of stuff. Was not trying to do a poor job. I would say it was a miscommunication, but they said, hey, you should have seen the change in guidelines, meaning I missed part of orientation. So that was the mistake, Chris. I never went back and worked another Pilot claim, but still have mad respect for what Pilot did for me as far as training and what point in my career they're able to get me to. But I absolutely was blacklisted and fired.
Dang. Well, I wish I could say I wasn't. I definitely was as well. And I really look back and, it's like those young mistakes that you talked about, Jason, in a previous episode, like, oh, you're 24, you just think about things differently and look at things differently. And a lot of times we don't picture in the future relationships, really what these relationships mean at these firms. But it was the first time I was ever inundated with claims. There was a hailstorm. It was actually a tornado ripped through Lumberton, North Carolina, through Fayetteville, and was on the ground all the way to Raleigh, which by car is like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. Tornado was on the ground that far. That was all my coverage area. And I was spread out 3 hours east, 3 hours west, 3 hours north, 3 hours south prior to that to get enough volume with the 2-3 companies I was working for to stay busy enough to sustain myself. And so suddenly I get hit right in my own backyard with 100 claims in a single evening, and then Brad knows all about it. You get another 100 the next day, another 100, another company onboards me. Before you know it, I have hundreds of claims and I'm booked out and I'm inspecting 15 to 20 a day. And there was a company, it was the second company I ever got on with. The first one, my father-in-law vouched for me, got me in the door. The second one I reached out to, somebody mentioned that they work for them and maybe I should call them, reached out to them and they said, sure, would like to talk with you. And one of their higher ups, it was a family-owned IA firm out of Georgia. I think it was Auto Damage Appraisers, ADA. And they came up and met me in person. He took me out to eat. He talked with me, said, look, we normally don't give new people a shot like this, but you seem like you got a head on your shoulders, whatever. We worked together for about a year or so, and it went great for the most part until that storm hit. Then all of a sudden, I had hundreds of claims from other people, and I had at one supplement, particularly, this is the real problem, that was 3 hours away up north of Raleigh, and I had to do 20, 40 inspections in a 2-day period that I'd scheduled. And to go get that supplement, which had turned into an emergency, would have literally been 6-7 hours of driving. And plus the time to do the supplement. And I said, I cannot re-inspect it. Can you please get somebody else to? They had nobody that said, if you don't go get this, basically we're done. And I was like, I literally will be passing on thousands and thousands of dollars to go get this one claim. I can't do it right now. And I was not sleeping much at that time, 2-4 hours a night sleeping for, 60, 90 days. It was crazy. And I probably should have thought through that better because I burned somebody who took a chance on me early on when I should have stuck to, like, I knew that was a possibility when I took the job and I didn't do it. So that I burned that relationship. And to this day, I still have great respect for them, but they gave me a shot early on. And then that's my one really big decision on the business side that I'm like, I wish I could go back and change that one supplement so that hadn't happened. But that's my story. I don't know if I'm technically blacklisted, but I was definitely fired, cut off, tried to get more work from him again later. Didn't work out. So, that's my story. So I like the commonalities I'm hearing, though. There's a lot about communication. It's a lot about relationships. And when you violate either one of those, a lot of times you end up losing work and relationships long term. So awesome story, guys. I love that. All right. So now,
if I can interject right here.
Yeah, go.
Sorry. Just for our viewers' sake, here's a few ways. You mentioned communication. When we distance ourselves at Royal Adjusting Services, whenever it's time to distance yourself from an adjusting service or somebody's claims business, it is almost always from failure to communicate what's going on. There's almost always something the field adjuster is concealing from us, whether they're working for multiple carriers. But the thing that tips us off quickest is lack of contact, and then lack of follow through. And when we start noticing those those common activities trending on somebody, that's when we know it's time to start looking for backup and just putting some distance between us and them. Whatever's going on is fine. We might waste our time with a phone call or two and straighten it up. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. The adjuster continues to do what they do. So that's probably the easiest way to not get blacklisted, is just maintain a good line of communication, which is professional.
Right. And I think it's a cyclical process. And Brad and I talk a lot about this, is you start off new and invigorated. You get your first claims from this company. You do really good. You're so grateful for the work, just like I was with that second company. And then you're getting better and better and better and more known, and you get more and more work. And so the success breeds success until it comes to this tipping point of you have too much work. And now you giving bad service, and now you're viewed as the bad adjuster or the irresponsible adjuster. But no, a lot of times it's just you have too much work and you didn't say no. So at iPath, we say a lot, you say yes to survive and then no to thrive. At some point, you have to be aware enough to say, I can't take anymore. I can't and provide the service that I want to provide. And that is the hardest part of business. Isn't getting started and making money. It's once you're successful, how do you maintain success for years? By learning to say no to things, because every opportunity is not the right opportunity in the right moment. So I think that's a huge thing to be aware of as a new person. You start having success, you think, oh, these old veterans are a bunch of chumps. They have 5-day cycle time. I got 2. You got 5 claims. They got 500, or whatever the case is, right? You don't know the story. And so a lot of times soon you'll be that person who's behind the 8 ball in cycle time and then getting blacklisted because you're not able to navigate. So say no. Learn to say no once you start thriving. So there we go.
It's the same thing as knowing how to prioritize, Chris.
It's true. It's true. So we kind of already jumped into the main topic here, which is what should an adjuster do if an IA firm blacklists them, if they fire them, and how can they avoid that? Is their career over? And then how do they avoid it? So those are kind of the 3 loose questions there. So Brad, I want you to start. It's been a while since you talked now. So go ahead. What would you say if somebody who's listening has been fired or blacklisted? Yeah. Is their career over, and what should they do?
Well, I'll just tell you what I did in my moment when the owner of the firm reached out to me. Well, the first thing I did is I owned it. I didn't try to deflect, didn't try to blame it on anyone. I, immediately just said, hey, I dropped the ball on this, and I see that now, and I recognize my mistake. And I was just trying to hopefully communicate to him that this is not who I am. It's what I did, but it's not who I am. And I just need you to know that I am a dependable person, that this is an instance. This is not every day. And so I owned it. I've just extended to him, I'm ready to make it right. Whatever I've got to do, you just tell me what I need to do to, in your mind, make it right, and it's done. Whatever it costs me, I'll do it. And then just, after that, I just took a few moments just to really think through and just say, okay, how can I avoid this in the future? What can I do? Because this is going to happen again. This opportunity to totally miss it and misread or, take a shop's word. And of course that happened. By the way, that happened during one of those intense times where I was just being bombarded with claims. It's right when the tornado hit, right in my backyard in Kentucky. So, man, and I'm still learning, that trying to get my head and heart around this saying no thing. I agree with you. That's great wisdom. Doing it is such a challenge, because we're all independents. I mean, we're self-employed and we're running a company, so, the concept of saying no to business, that's unheard of. But yeah, we just had a hailstorm here 2 weeks ago, and I'm still riding that wave and just trying to figure out. But I reached out to all the firms and just said, hey, this is where I'm at. As far as what you're sending me, I'll let you decide. But I just want you to know these things are not going to get turned around as quickly as you would like, or even as I would like. So I think communication, own it, honesty, transparency, integrity doesn't mean you're never going to make a mistake. It just simply has to do with how you're going to respond to it, because we're human. It's just the human factor. You can't remove it. So that's what I did in my situation.
Love it. And I think being aware for those of you listening, because you haven't maybe had your moment yet, hopefully, like Brad has been forced into a moment. I've been forced into many moments. Jason's had moments, is that recognizing the formula for those moments. It's when you're overwhelmed, usually it's not, you start getting sloppy, high pressure, you're trying to get done fast, and it only takes that one corner. But if you at least recognize that, whoa, I'm getting overwhelmed, you can be aware that this is where I can make a mistake. I'm not getting enough sleep, things like that. And that stuff's huge for making bad decisions and making bad judgment calls. So just be aware of it. Hear the formula, because it's repeatable. We're all saying the same thing in a different way. All right, Jason. So what can people do if they've been blacklisted by an IA firm or fired, and is their career over?
No, hardly. Really, Brad, really love what you said there about just being, people are mistake prone. That's just part of being a mammal. It's just part of, our brains get us into habits. And once a habit is seen, our brain says, oh, that's safe. Then we might not go back and think about that decision, or think about something you're doing on a daily basis regularly, that could turn into a bad habit. It happens to all of us. But what Brad said about owning it, so for me, if you're going to ask for forgiveness after we said, hey, we can no longer do business, I need you to be able to specifically identify what mistake you made, and then next time how it's going to be different, or how you would have done it differently the last time to prevent whatever chaotic situation occurred as a result. So the IA firm is not giving you a hard time because they want to give you a hard time. The IA firm wants that claim to come in as a deck page and a first notice of loss, and then leave as a beautiful report that no one even has questions about, because it has every detail there is to know about the investigation. Okay. And it's easy to read. The person who receives it loves it, and they're able to process the file and move on with their day. Okay. So when the IA firm is unable to do that, that's whenever you go, okay, now it's problem solving time. And then you get down there and you find an adjuster, and like you said, he's overwhelmed, he's tired. To us, that means he has other priorities, or she, and they are overwhelmed. So we might need to get someone in there just to give them assistance in their area, so their territory doesn't just fall off the map. Okay. So the answer is one, make sure you understand what you did wrong and be able to have an honest conversation with somebody else about it, including yourself. Okay. A lot of people will forego that conversation with themselves and maintain that pride and ego, and then go and do something that's not authentic and have a conversation with someone else and go make the same mistake again because they didn't have a big boy conversation with themselves. Number two, diversify. If you're in a territory like Chris was talking about, he had this, he had that, he had this. That was because Chris had diversified. He had reached the top where his cup was overflowing, and he needed to figure out which business he could cut back on, where his profit margins on. That's where your business analytics really come into play. But that at first is not a new guy problem. So the answer is your career is definitely not over. And if you don't make any mistakes, you're not trying hard.
Good.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a whole other topic for another episode. But, you know, in business, you can't serve everybody, no matter who you are, whether you're an online personality or even Apple. Apple doesn't have every customer. And so as independent adjusters, a lot of times we feel like we have to serve every customer, and it gets us in that trouble. Whereas I think 99% of the time it's niche down. So what is it you really want to serve? What you're offering, and where are you going to serve it? Because that's a niche. If Brad's in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, I believe is where he's at, and he's driving all the way to Indiana, and that's a 3-hour drive, well, maybe he needs to cut out Indiana and niche down further because he's too busy. And that's how we do that in business in general. You hear that at business principles, but I think if you're facing that overwhelm, that's a good thing. That the process is, what can I cut out? What service that's not bringing the most value? And then how can I niche down my market further in geographical location as an adjuster a lot of times. So for me, that's one way. That's the way to fix the problem that you see happening is I'm too overwhelmed. But then if you are blacklisted, we've had people in the iPath community who had that happen and came to us and said, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I was working over here for this big carrier that insures so many people. My career is over. And I'm like, no, your career might be over with that particular IA firm in that carrier because that's most of their work. But your career is not over. As Jason said, diversifying. Our industry is huge. If you have a bad day where you make a bad decision and it is not able to be saved with that IA firm and you lose that business, I'm here to tell you, as someone who's still in the industry, you can find other work. But you take those lessons learned with you, as Jason said, you reflect on it like Brad said, and you really process what it is you did. Because at first I was just mad when I went through that whole experience, and it was hard to take that lesson to heart. It wasn't until months later when everything kind of simmered down, I'm like, I really botched that. And that really stood with me for years and really bugged me. So I think everything they're saying is right on. And then how to avoid it in the future is to niche down. Don't get too busy. When you see the busyness come, niche down further. And then guys, do you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode of tips to avoid it? Not once it's happened, because I think that's a lot of what we said, but once, how do we avoid it? I think we heard communication. Anything more tactical or specific that possibly you can think of?
Yeah, we just jump in.
Yeah, just jump in. Free for all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, honestly, I am, I know I'm a guest on this podcast, but I'm also a listener, and I am faced with that. I'm being faced with this situation right now. The daily claim load is just, it's too much. And, I remember a day when I was just praying and crossing my fingers and just hoping that I would just, have days like this. So it's here, but now, and so I'm trying to think through a strategy to correctly address this, my own self. And, I've got a couple different things that I feel are correct and right. But then you've got to carry them out. You've got to have a strategy, and then you've got to make it happen. So, gosh, that's a huge question. I think it's so unique to your region, and even your passions. What is it in your core do you love doing? In the auto world, I'm finding that I love heavy equipment. And so I'm I'm at this crossroads. Do I take myself into a deep, and then also I built houses for all these years, and I'm thinking, man, I don't want that world to go to waste, that knowledge and even that passion. So, man, I don't think I answered it really well, but it's just some transparency that I'm having to deal with this right now. In the daily world, they want you to turn these things around in 2 days or less. Well, currently, right now, today, I'm scheduled for the next week and plus 2 days. So, now I've communicated that to all of these firms that listen, and they just, I'm hoping that they remember my communication to them.
We're hoping Brad doesn't get blacklisted at the end of this Blacklisted episode. It's kind of what we're hoping, right? But that'd make a good story that we could do an addendum to this episode. Jason, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Chris, this has been a great episode. If I was going to say you're getting to that point, you need to optimize your business. You need to analyze what's going on. You need to picture what's the next few days, what it's going to look like. And if it's giving you that feeling in your gut, you need to listen to your gut.
Yep. If you get that feeling in your gut, turn off. If you can, turn everybody off. Deal with what you got and let your brain think on it for a minute, and do the 80-20 rule. Find where the majority of your work's coming from. The easiest, not always the most expensive work, but the easiest work that you can knock out, get through, and make a good income. Where is the majority of that work that's really easy to knock out? Because that's where 80% of your income is going to come from, and then everything else is going to zap tons of your other time, effort, energy, and then you're not going to be able to focus on that core. So niche down, find your core, your 80-20, and don't get blacklisted. All right, guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the Adjuster Talk podcast. Until next week, keep walking your path and claiming your life. And please, if you enjoyed this episode, share it on social media like LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever it is that you spend time. And if you get a chance, leave us a review on iTunes. It would mean the world to us. See you next week.